Hi, it's Brian. Before we get started, a couple of things. First of all, this episode of Illusion is arriving the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So, happy Thanksgiving. The story you're about to hear is the next best thing to a Thanksgiving story about an illusion. It's not quite, but it's close enough. It's about a magician, a fancy dinner, and depending on which version of the story you believe, a turkey. I thought it was a fun and fitting story for this time of year, and it was just too good to pass up. But it is a little shorter than the stories I'm used to bringing you. I just wanted to acknowledge that. The second thing, speaking of the holiday season, is that I wanted to let you know about another podcast I host, one that comes out only during the holiday season. It's called Christmas Past, and it explores the fascinating histories behind Christmas traditions, like how modern gift wrap was invented by accident, or how the practice of writing letters to Santa was popularized by an audacious New York City con man, or how the Nutcracker was initially a flop in Russia. The first episode of the season arrives on Thanksgiving Day, and episodes will arrive on Mondays and Thursdays all throughout the Christmas season. But you can check out all of 2016's episodes right now, and then join in when the 2017 season kicks off in a couple of days. So check out Christmas Past wherever you get your podcasts. It's a different style and format than Illusion, for sure, but it's the same focus on bringing you fascinating stories you may not have heard before. At the end of this episode, I'll come back and play a clip from an upcoming episode. Okay, now, on with the show. The tuxedoed waiter wasn't in on the joke. He was just the one who delivered it. And as far as jokes go, it wasn't much of one, unless you consider mocking someone on the basis of his religion funny, which apparently some people did, and fewer people frowned upon in the early 1900s. Enough so that at an elegant dinner party in the Philippines, the host and some of his friends thought it would be funny to play this prank on one of their honored guests. The victim was a short and pudgy man, seated amid the dignitaries and politicians and tycoons and aristocrats, his impeccable dress mismatching his gruff voice and odd proportions. Short arms, tiny hands, and though he had an Italian-sounding last name, it was just a name he had given himself to use professionally. Those who knew him well knew that he had been born Max Katz to Jewish parents in Poland in 1873. And so wouldn't it be funny, they thought, to have the waiter serve him a roasted pig, complete with an apple stuffed into its mouth, for dinner. The waiter placed the silver tray in front of the man, who looked down at it, and then at the waiter, and the host, and to everyone seated around the candlelit table. All eyes were on the man, who sat awkwardly at the table, looking at the forbidden meal placed before him. And what he did next was both astonishing and yet also completely unsurprising, because Max Malini, as he was known to all the world, was a man who did things, astonishing things. And unlike his fellow magicians of the day, the heyday of great illusionists like Harry Houdini and Howard Thurston, who performed on large stages and played to the back of the room and relied on complex apparatus and hidden assistants and elaborate stagecraft to saw women in half and make elephants disappear, Malini performed effects on a smaller scale, intimate illusions that happened in your personal space, inches away, with borrowed objects. He had performed this way since the beginning of his career, busking in gritty New York City saloons, honing his craft standing on sawdust-covered floors, dealing cards onto tables tacky and stained from years' worth of spilled beer, vanishing coins for rowdy drunks, perfecting sleight of hand, and making several innovations to accommodate for his unusually small hands, innovations that magicians still use today for effects like the famous cups and balls routine. Mastering sleights and audience management and misdirection had earned him a reputation, one that would eventually bring him fame and fortune among royalty and heads of state. In 1902, Malini was strolling through the halls of Congress when he approached a senator. He struck up conversation, during which he grabbed the startled senator's jacket and yanked. The senator heard the sound of ripping fabric and looked at Malini wide-eyed and disbelieving to see that the man had torn a button right off. And then, just as quickly, Malini made another move, and the button was magically restored. The senator hired Malini right there for a 10-week engagement that would put him in front of some of the highest rollers in the nation's capital. At one gathering, another senator tossed an orange to Malini, saying, "Here, turn this orange into a..." And almost before the senator could finish saying the word lemon, Malini had transformed the fruit and tossed it back to him. A Philadelphia newspaper wrote that an unknown little wizard appears in Washington and mystifies the entire Congress with his new tricks. It was the kind of impromptu close-up miracle that made Malini an in-demand performer among the wealthy and elite, who had come to know about him through word of mouth. They had heard the stories and wanted to see for themselves. Heard about command performances for the King of Siam and Queen Alexandria and King Edward VII. Heard about the lavish gifts he received from royalty in Europe and Asia. They had heard about the very busy man who would cancel appointments just to spend time in Malini's company, and how that very busy man was the 29th President of the United States, Warren G. Harding. They had heard about the time he sang with opera star Enrico Caruso, how he baffled John Jacob Astor, John D. Rockefeller, Alexander Graham Bell, Al Capone, and Presidents McKinley, and Coolidge, and Roosevelt. And there was the story about the dinner at the home of an English duke, where Malini pulled a dinner-time prank of his own. As many magicians know, it's possible to put a chicken into a sort of sleep state or hypnotic state by tucking its head under its wing and rocking it back and forth. Malini had sneaked into the kitchen with a chicken that he had plucked alive and hypnotized. He placed the chicken on a platter and garnished it with potatoes and carrots and a bed of greens. And later, just before the Duke was about to carve the bird, Malini poked it with a fork, at which time the bird woke up, jumped off the plate, and ran squawking down the table. It was a story Malini told himself many times, but also one that appeared in several 18th century books on conjuring, which calls its veracity into question. But there's another story that others have told and continue to tell, one that really is true, and baffles other magicians even to this day. At a dinner party, Malini took his seat and, importantly, he remained seated all throughout the evening, never leaving his chair. At the end of the party, he asked to borrow the hat of one of the women at the table. He looked it over, admiring it for being made by a respected Parisian hatter. He was about to return it when he proposed a little experiment. He set a $50 spinning on the tabletop and covered it with the hat, and asked the owner of the hat to guess which side the coin had landed on. She guessed heads, and he lifted the hat to show her that she had guessed correctly. "Let's do it again," he said. And again he set the $50 spinning and covered it with the hat, and again the woman made a guess. But when he lifted the hat this time, the $50 was gone, and in its place was a solid block of ice, barely small enough to fit under the hat. An effect like this was made to appear impromptu, but obviously it took elaborate planning and setup well in advance, because Malini was a man who prepared for these moments, anticipated that senators might toss him an orange to catch him off guard, was ready at a moment's notice to appear to tear a button off a man's suit jacket. And knowing that, let's go back to that dinner party in the Philippines, with Malini seated at the table and a roasted pig laid out in front of him. Malini wasn't a man who was easily set up. And so, without missing a beat, he took the napkin off of his lap, and with a smooth flourish covered the pig with it, and paused for effect, just long enough to register the curious smirks and looks of cautious anticipation on the faces all around the table. And then, whisking the napkin away, he revealed that the pig had vanished, and in its place sat 2 turkey drumsticks, one of which he casually picked up and proceeded to eat, as though nothing had happened. There's a coda to this story, possibly apocryphal. Days later, Malini received a call from one of the household staff from where the dinner party was held. She said, "What you did was amazing and everything, but you need to tell us where you hid the pig." because the house reeks. Illusion is written and produced by me, Brian Earl. Search for Illusion Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and find show notes, etc. at illusionpodcast.com. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please tell a friend or leave a review if you like the show. These are quick and painless ways to show support, and they help the show to grow. And now, as promised, here's a preview from this season of Christmas Past.
Teddy Ruxpin and Laser Tag.
Laser Tag, that's the one I was thinking of there. Because I don't think any of us had the Ruxpin.
No, we didn't have Laser Tag either.
Didn't we?
No, I always wanted it. No.
Didn't someone? My brother Chris and I are taking a little stroll down memory lane. We grew up in New England, mainly during the 80s, the best decade to be a kid at Christmas. The best decade, period, if you ask me. Rubik's Cubes and E.T. and Star Wars and Teddy Ruxpin and He-Man and Pac-Man and Atari, Michael Jackson and Transformers. I mean, seriously, I feel sorry for anyone who wasn't a kid during the 80s. It was, to use an 80s phrase, totally awesome. And the Christmas season would kick off every year with the arrival of those thick, glossy papered catalogs from Sears and Service Merchandise. We'd dog-ear the corners of pages that displayed Ewok villages, magic trick sets, remote control race cars and robots. We'd stare and dream and drop not-so-subtle hints to our parents. It was just as much a part of celebrating the season as trimming the tree, hanging stockings, and making cookies. Now you may wince at the idea that advertising is a proper Christmas tradition. With Christmas being as commercial as it is, a lot of people see them as an unwelcome distraction from the true meaning of the season. But I can't deny it. I have very many fond memories of the Christmas TV commercials and print advertisements that I grew up on. And whenever I'm in the mood for a quick dose of nostalgia, and that's pretty often this time of year, I love watching those old commercials. There's a ton of them available on YouTube, and I'll bet you've got one or two favorites of your own. For better or worse, Christmas advertising is part of the season, and it's here to stay. But how it got here in the first place, that's the part I find interesting. It's part of an interconnected web of economic and cultural and technological forces coming together around the same time. And as with so many of the customs that are part of the Christmas season, we can thank the Brits for it. I'm Brian Earl. This is Christmas Past. Subscribe to Christmas Past wherever you find your podcasts, and search for Christmas Past Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And happy holidays.